So the Prime Minister has taken the unprecedented move of raising the government's travel advice to level 4 for the entire world as the government works to constrain the coronavirus crisis. So Scott Morrison says returning Australians have been the biggest source of new coronavirus cases. So the government is telling every Australian not to travel overseas. He also announced a ban today on all non-essential indoor gatherings of more than 100 people. The limit for outdoor gatherings will remain at 500. There'll also be strict new restrictions on visits to aged care facilities with a limit of 2 people at a time, with visitors under 16 only allowed by special exception. Exemptions will be made for families visiting loved ones who are about to die. All Australians overseas wishing to return home have been asked to do so as soon as possible. That advice came from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade overnight. All Australian-led international Anzac Day events, including Gallipoli, have been cancelled this year, although the Prime Minister made clear in that media conference that there will be a national event in Canberra that will be televised, but obviously numbers will be tightly restricted for that ceremony, and states and territories might hold their own ceremonies as well. Virgin Australia is suspending all international flights from March the 30th until mid-June and is reducing domestic capacity by half, also until June the 14th. Both the UK and the US are ramping up their economic response to the virus. The British government is pledging financial help for families and businesses, while the Trump administration is preparing a near $1 trillion aid package. I'm joined now by political reporter Stephanie Boris. Steph, g'day. First, just so much to get through with this announcement. First of all, something I want to clarify, because in that media conference, I think the Prime Minister described it as a ban on foreign travel. What's the situation with what they've announced on foreign travel today?
So, Joe, I've got the advice from the Smart Traveller website in front of me, so I might just read those details to you. It says, "We now advise all Australians do not travel overseas at this time. This is our highest advice level." So, for those not familiar with the Smart Traveller website, there's level 1 to 4 with advice given about different countries and whether you can or can't go to those countries. So, the level is at the highest level. Scott Morrison did say it was an indefinite ban. Technically, you can't stop people from going overseas, but obviously you'd be silly not to listen to this advice that is being issued today. On top of that too, keep in mind just last night DFAT issued other advice about Australians overseas at the moment. Those that are travelling or maybe on a business trip, the advice now is to cut that trip short and to get home as soon as possible, because DFAT is concerned that there will be further travel restrictions put in place across the globe. Of course, too, we're seeing a number of airlines cut their services, and there are also concerns if Australians get sick overseas, how much help they'll be able to receive within foreign hospitals.
Okay, so let's now go, we might come back to a bit of travel stuff later, but let's now go to the numbers in terms of gatherings. What's been announced today?
So in place at the moment is non-essential gatherings of more than 500 people are banned. So that's things such as sporting events or big music concerts. Today's announcement is that any non-essential gatherings that are in indoor spaces of people above 100 are now banned too. So I did ask the Prime Minister's office if that includes weddings, because there are a lot of couples getting married this year, and the confirmation that yes, if you're having a wedding in an indoor space of more than 100 guests, you will now have to cancel that. There is a list of gatherings that are still allowed. I'll run through those. So they include airports, public transport, medical facilities, aged care facilities, jails, courts, parliaments, supermarkets, office buildings, mining sites, education, childcare, also people transiting through busy areas such as Martin Place in Sydney or Bourke Street Mall in Melbourne. People are allowed to go about their daily lives in those areas, but the big message pushed again today was that social distancing, trying where possible to keep 1.5 metres between you and other people, and also making sure you wash your hands as much as possible and use hand sanitizer where a bathroom isn't available.
And schools have been a contentious issue. What's the announcement on schools today?
There has been a lot of discussion, Joe, about what to do with schools because we have seen other countries close their schools down as coronavirus continues to spread. The advice that the federal government and state and territory leaders have received from the Australian medical experts is not to close schools yet. The argument there is that it would cause other problems if schools were to close now. There were figures given that as much as 30% of the medical workforce would have to stay home to look after their children. Obviously, we need those medical workers at the moment. But the Prime Minister has said that if the situation gets worse, they will, of course, listen to the medical advice. And if further school closures are needed, that will happen. At the moment, we are seeing a handful of schools on the East Coast closed. That's only when there's been a specific case of coronavirus diagnosed in a student, a teacher, or in the latest case when someone has visited a school.
Yeah. And what about aged care?
So aged care now, they are putting restrictions in around who can visit and who can't. This is obviously because the elderly community is most vulnerable when it comes to contracting coronavirus. So there's a list of different things, including the fact that there should be only 2 visitors at one time per day. And visits, they're hoping, can either occur in the person's room or outdoors. Also, no more social activities or entertainment to be held at nursing homes. No school groups, obviously, as well. And also, any children below the age of 16 are actually not permitted in aged care centres now unless they've had formal approval from that particular aged care centre. The reasoning behind that is because younger children don't follow hygiene advice as closely as adults do.
And Steph, the Prime Minister was probably as direct as he's been and as strong as he's been with his comments about what's been happening in the supermarkets today as well.
That's right, Joe. I went to the supermarket last night to buy dinner and I went to 3 supermarkets and couldn't find meat anywhere. So people are really panic buying and really collecting and stockpiling a lot of food. The Prime Minister today saying, do not do that. Food will continue to be stocked in supermarkets. Even look at Italy where they are in lockdown. The supermarkets there are still open. On the panic buying, he said, stop hoarding. It's ridiculous. It's one of the most disappointing things I've seen in Australian behaviour. That's Scott Morrison saying that. But obviously, despite that message being spread, we are still seeing people very worried, lining up at shopping centres. There are different measures being put in place by the supermarkets at the moment in terms of how many products you can buy and particular hours for the elderly and disabled to go and get goods without being harassed by other people. So a very strong message there from the Prime Minister today that the shops will still be there throughout the months ahead, so please stop panic buying.
Okay, Stephanie Boris, we'll leave it there and hopefully you can find some dinner tonight. Stephanie Boris reporting there from Parliament House in Canberra.